what has happened last night, the US attack on Iran and then Iranian response. And what was different last night, that the United States intensified the attacks. The attacks were, somehow more intensive compared to the last two attacks in the aftermath of the signing of the MOU. Then Iranian response, which was they added Qatari target to their list. Last night they attacked Qatar after weeks. Qatar was not part of the Iranian targets since the ceasefire was announced between Iran and the United States. So that was one of the main changes last night. And today we've learned that they targeted a military, a radar in Qatar. So what's going on right now in Iran? The funeral was going on yesterday in Iraq, in Karbala and in Najaf. Today it's in Iran. The new footages are coming out. Here is Mashhad, for example, and you see millions of people are on street for the last step of the funeral procession of the late supreme leader of Iran. This is the atmosphere in Iran. And then just 30 minutes ago, Elijah, we've learned that new explosions are happening in Bushehr and Bandar Abbas in the southern part of Iran and Shiraz. There is no confirmation that it was some sort of attack on Iran. And the other point that is happening right now is the Iranian attack on Jordan. And the ballistic missiles, they attacked Muaffaq Salti Air Base in eastern Jordan. And we have some photos coming out here. For example, is one of them. It shows the ballistic missile, the Iranian launching ballistic missiles, and this is the footage that just came out, and it shows they're using, these ballistic missiles were fired from Khomeini, which is another city in Iran. The footage, and they're launching missiles from the southern part of Iran, from Shiraz, from Tabriz, from the northern part of Iran. It's northwest of Iran, Tabriz. And they're hitting the targets in Jordan. So far, initial reports, it shows that a direct hit against an industrial complex in Jordan. So the other point is the United States has announced they may put the blockade back on the Strait of Hormuz, on the Persian Gulf. And Iran overnight, they shipped out 10 million barrels of oil overnight, last night, immediately. And it was reported by Tanker Tracker. And this is the situation right now. Iran is attacking Jordan and American bases in the region. And it seems in the coming hours, we're going to see some sort of new confrontations, maybe the United States attacking Iran again. Elijah, go ahead, and your understanding of what's going on with the so-called MOU.
Okay, thank you. So these attacks are not surprising, really, and the MOU not implemented is also not a surprise. There are new elements that happened yesterday that are important to highlight. First is the location of the target, and second, why all this is happening, because people need to understand what lies behind all this exchange of missiles and attacks. The first one comes from the Americans, who attacked for the first time the railway between Tehran and Mashhad. This attack is significant because it shows a very personal attack. It is not strategic. It is the day of the funeral when everybody was going toward Mashhad and wanted to participate to the funeral of the assassinated Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. So in a way, the view of so many people, we're talking about millions in Iran and in Iraq on different stage participating to this funeral, and Donald Trump very surprised of this view of the people supporting the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei and standing united against the Americans and the Israelis when Donald Trump sent kind of a message also to Benjamin Netanyahu saying, well, this is not what you promised, and you spoke about that the Iranian system will fall within 3-4 days. People are fed up of this ruling system. By bombing the railway that going to Mashhad is a kind of personal attack rather than strategic attack. Secondly, the attack on the railway between Iran and China, that the supply line was attacked, and for the first time we see the Sistan Baluchistan in the south that is also one of the target, Shahabar harbor that is run partially by the Indian and by India, and also that serves mainly India and Pakistan and the rest of Asia. That is a new. So these things are a little bit of a point to stand and stop on, saying actually the Americans are starting to bomb civilian targets and they no longer have military targets, so they went against the civilians. And this targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime and crime against humanity, but this is not what Donald Trump is most concerned about. Now let's see the Iranian retaliation. Iran retaliated against US assets in Kuwait and Bahrain, but also in Jordan. And this is where we move to why all this is happening. Actually, it is not only about paragraph 5 of the MOU. Paragraph 5 is very clear to the Iranian. It is interpreted completely differently by the Americans. And the paragraph 5 gives the Iranian the possibility to manage the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days and to talk to the Omani about it, which Iran is doing. But there is no mention of CENTCOM or the American intervention. Therefore, the Americans are not intervening in the Strait of Hormuz because they are included in the MOU in this particular affair. On the contrary, and here we understand why, and people need to know, it is about hegemony and control. In fact, the Strait of Hormuz is the only point Iran has as a leverage to stop the war in Iran, to stop the war in Lebanon and in the region, to release all the frozen asset, to force the Americans to pay compensation for the war, and to lift all the sanctions. Without the Strait of Hormuz, Iran can be totally ignored, as all the Americans and the Europeans did for so many decades, and then increase sanction year after year or month after month, and every new US president start with the new sanctions on Iran. So that is a leverage. And what the Americans are doing is actually they were not honest in the dialogue with the Iranians by signing the MOU. We saw Donald Trump signing the MOU in Paris, in Versailles, during a dinner with the G7 leaders. So he was signing, either he didn't know the details, but he was willingly signing it. He was not forced to sign it. Now, having signed the MOU with an objective to solve the problem with Iran is one thing, which is highly unlikely, it seems, and to only open the Strait of Hormuz and bring down the price of oil so he can refill the 400 million barrels, more or less, that he has used during this conflict in his strategic reserves, because the strategic reserves are more or less above 700 million barrels. And Donald Trump told us that they were only a few weeks away from depleting the entire reserve. And we know from leakage in the media that the Americans had from 700 plus, they had a 331 million barrel only, which means a serious problem for the US and for the rest of the world when there is no reserve oil. So what Donald Trump is doing is to bringing down the price of oil to make sure that he can compensate the millions of barrels he has used during the conflict, bring down the price, and then start again telling Iran, you cannot control the MOU. But he's not telling it just by vocally saying it. No. What happened exactly is the Iranians, according to the MOU, said, we are in control of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to allow any ship to come in and out, not the Israelis, of course, and the Americans, but you have to come by us. This is what Iran said. And you cannot go by Omani waters because there is a place in the Strait of Hormuz that is more or less 23 miles. And the international law says that 12 miles from the shore of each country belong to the country in question, which means Oman and Iran. Each one has 12 miles under their full sovereignty, where there is a 1 mile that overlap in both sides, or half a mile, let's say, on both sides. Nevertheless, the Omani and the Iranians were talking about how to organize that. And they have agreed that instead of asking fees that Omani rejected completely, they will ask for services at the end of the 60 days, where there is already a company offering these services and being paid by all the shipping companies and ship owners for various services that they offer to the ship crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Iran and Oman agreed to share these benefits, and they would run the Strait of Hormuz in this way. But after the 60 days, why is that? Because first, there is no trust whatsoever with the Americans, which proved that they are not in respect of the paragraph 1 of ending the war. Secondly, because the war is still ongoing, and we have seen what happened yesterday, last night, and the night before. So the war is not over. So for Iran, it doesn't want to let go of the Strait of Hormuz unless the war is over. The Americans asked all the ships to coordinate with the US Navy to cross from the Omani side, and they put pressure on Oman to say nothing. But what happened is ship owners and insurance companies are afraid, and they are kind of a coward because of their money, which they are rightly so, because they don't want to risk the price of a ship and for the shipping company to increase the insurance, but then having to pay a large amount for any damage. So coward in a positive way, which means they don't really have the courage to go and challenge Iran because they don't have to. There is a safe passage. They can go on both sides of the Larak Iranian island, respond to the Iranian, and just cross for free for the 60 days since the signature of the MOU. Therefore, the Americans could not put pressure on the ship owners and on the insurance company. So they went to the countries. They went to Oman, to Saudi Arabia, to the Emirates, and to Qatar. Qatar provided an LNG ship because gas is still very expensive in the world. It's still 70% above the normal price because gas reacts differently from oil. And Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, they all provided each one a tanker. And they asked these tankers to cross from the Omani side without coordinating with the Iranians. So Iran did not claim the responsibility, but obviously they were attacked by drones while violating the call of the Iranian to abide by the rules like everybody else and cross for free. And this is where the Americans retaliated. And they retaliated because they want to remain in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they don't want Iran to control it, which is the mentality of colonialism. That the Americans, they are self-appointed the custodian of the Strait of Hormuz, and they cannot accept that Iran will take this card away. This is why what we have seen in the last 48 hours, we're going to see it again and again, intensively superior or inferior, or the return of a few days of exchange of missiles, but not something that Donald Trump will call a war, because he doesn't want to go to the Congress and ask for a permission. He would call it a special operation. He will call it defending the allies. He will call it whatever he wants. But these are going to be the exchanges between both countries, unless they sit down and they review the MOU and the Americans accept this explanation, which is highly unlikely, because America will never release all the Iranian money, will never give Iran back $300 billion as a compensation and lift all the sanction. Already, Article 4 has been violated, and the Americans are not releasing the frozen asset as they promised. First, they said 24 billions, then they said 12, and then they said 3, and now they are saying 6. However, they are telling the Iranian that they need to buy the soya from America, and they're putting conditions on the smaller amount they are releasing. This is where we are at today.
Yeah. Last night they attacked the Sirik area and the commercial and fishing pier in Sirik, and they killed. It was reported by IRIB, the Iranian state media, that three people were killed and 15 injured in that attack. Which is not something new. The United States is doing that in South America. It's not every time they're hitting these fishing boats and killing more people. But here is the other part of the new reports, is that the sirens right now, as we talk, sound at Victoria base near Baghdad, the international airport in Baghdad, and at the same time Iran is bombing the Kurds and the US base in Iraqi Kurdistan. This is part of the problem, and it was always one of the main concerns on the part of Iranians, and these Kurds from the Iraqi Kurdistan going to do something there. That's why you see Iran attacking them again and again. So do you think that is there some sort of plan, in your opinion, for some sort of invasion or incursion from Iraq?
Of course not. They can't, because first, President Erdogan of Turkey stopped this attack a long time ago when the Americans sent the weapons to the Kurds. And the Americans said, we want to change the regime in Iran. And then they said, we want the missile program, the allies, etc. And then after that, they pulled back and they said, no, we don't want that. But Donald Trump was complaining about the arms sent to the Kurds. Now, arming the Kurds in the north is very dangerous for Iraq, for Turkey, and for Syria, because it tickles the idea of having a Kurdistan nation in Iran, in Iraq, in Turkey, and in Syria, joining together in one state in the middle of these countries, which is something that these countries will not accept. So empowering the Kurds in north of Iran is something that the Mossad and the CIA have been doing for a very long time. However, the Iranian army has not been engaged in any battle so far. It is concentrated on these areas like Kurdistan in the northwest and Sistan, Baluchistan in the southeast, because they are concerned about the possibility of the Americans to do something about these groups like Jaish al-Adl, sorry, and like the Kurds in the north, to give them weapons and ask them to clash and create riots in the country, as they have done at the beginning of this year, in December 2025, January 2026.
Yeah. Here is, Elijah, the photo of the, let me just bring it up here. The photo that just came out. It shows the situation at the Benoud dock in Asaluye, in close to the Boucher, and after the attack, in the aftermath of the attack by the United States last night. And looking at Elijah, there's some reports. I don't know if there. It says that Donald Trump may want to use the borders with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with Pakistan, or do something on the ground. These are initial reports. I don't know if that's right or not. But the other report that just came out as the another U.S. warship has been attacked in the Persian Gulf again, just moments ago. You know what is so strange to me, Elijah? Yesterday, it was said by the military advisor to the supreme leader of Iran that it wasn't all about the tankers. It was the United States trying to use the warship in the Strait of Hormuz, which was avoided somehow, forced by Iranian forces, you know, force them out of the strait. This is the way that the United States. This is one of the red lines for the Iranian side and IRGC. They said that it was part of MOU. It was all about, as you see in the MOU, it's all about commercial vessels and ships. It's nothing militarily, no military, operation in the Strait of Hormuz. But you see, the United States is using the Navy to do that.
Yes, it is clear in the paragraph 5 of the MOU that once it is signed, Iran will make arrangement using its best effort for the safe passage of commercial vessels. It is really specifically stated as commercial vessels within the 60 days. And they said, again, from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman, and vice versa. So they say the traffic of commercial vessels that is mentioned twice in paragraph 5 will start, and they will remove all the obstacles within 30 days. There are only 2 weeks so far since the signature happened. So it is the Iranian that allow only commercial vessels when the Americans are using their navy, their military vessels to cross the Strait of Hormuz in violation of the MOU. And then for the point that the Americans can attack and occupy islands, as Donald Trump always threatened. So first of all, the Americans are a very strong, powerful military country. However, occupying is one thing and sustaining the occupation is something completely different. If the Americans occupy an island, and they can easily do that with a lot of firepower, and then they send boots on the ground, how long they can remain in an area that can be bombed hundreds of kilometers away? They can't. This is why this is not a plan where the Americans can do. This is why they need proxy forces. And the only proxy forces powerful and strong enough to be organized and create something are the Kurds in the north that are not allowed due to regional pressure on Donald Trump. So this is where we are at. And yes, the Americans have no intention to honor the MOU. They even stopped the waivers on the Iranian oil yesterday. So they said that for 60 days they will allow Iran to sell its oils, and they didn't. Last night, 5 Iranian tankers left Iran full of oil because they knew the Americans can do something about that too, and they can suspend it completely, or they can put back the blockade. But again, if Donald Trump imposes the blockade on Iran, he will impose the blockade on the rest of the world through that Strait of Hormuz, and then we are back again to square one.